Hello, everyone. Welcome back to week 11 of Web Design Decal. So, unfortunately, today Asia is experiencing Wi Fi issues because she's at Berkeley. So, I'm sure all you Berkeley people also aren't joining today, unfortunately. But hopefully, that situation gets better. But basically, she's going to be teaching design on next steps in design. So, I think it's a really important topic, especially if you're going to pursue something beyond this class. Maybe it's like a club or a project or even a career. So definitely look out for her video that she's going to post tomorrow with the slides and watch that when it comes out. But today, programming wise, we'll just go through loops, arrays, and libraries. But before that, we have our announcements, of course. There are a decent amount of announcements today. Homework 9 is extended to tomorrow at 7 p.m. Just because Berkeley people don't have Wi Fi right now and can't submit or do homework. So they have an extra day to work on it. Hopefully, this situation doesn't go into tomorrow, but we'll see. And homework 10 is the last homework and will be released tonight. And there are also no more labs because there was a lab 10 that's supposed to come out on Thursday, but we decided to scrap it because we don't want an assignment due on Thanksgiving break. And we also wanted to give you guys more time to work on final project. And so this homework 10, the last homework, is due next Tuesday at 7 p.m., same day, same time, just like normal, but it's right before Thanksgiving break. But basically, after that's due, there are no more homework or lab assignments that are due, and you would have all of Thanksgiving break and beyond to work on final projects. So we really took your guys' feedback to heart. So hopefully you guys have more than enough time to work on this project. And speaking of Thanksgiving break, next week we won't have class on Tuesday, even though Tuesday is still technically there's still class. Web design decal we won't have it, just so you guys have more time to relax on Tuesday evening. Maybe you could work on your assignments or final project more. And also Thursday, of course, there's no lab. And don't expect office hours to be up on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, because of course that's break. Monday, Tuesday, that's iffy. That really depends on the individual TAs. So check Piazza for that. But have a great Thanksgiving break, though. And for final project, that is due Tuesday, December 1st, which is in exactly 2 weeks. And that deadline will come pretty fast. So if you haven't started on final project yet, definitely do, because if you remember from midterm project, it was definitely easy to design something on Figma, but to actually code it took a lot of effort and a lot of time. So please start early. And of course, we'll have please submit on the form mentioned here. Basically, as mentioned in the instructions, you're only submitting on this form because you're submitting a live URL on GitHub pages or wherever web hosting service you're using. Any files submitted on Portal will not be considered. So if you don't submit on this form and you submit on Portal, we will count it as an unfinished assignment because we won't see it on the form. So yeah, and of course we have the office hours and feedback forms like usual. So like I mentioned, I think I mentioned this a couple weeks ago about this resource called Cofolios, which is a website that shows a lot of design students' um, personal portfolios, which they personally designed. And you can also see where they've worked or interned at in the past. And the best part about this site is their student office hours resource, which you could literally sign up for any like any student that has volunteered to do office hours, and you could ask them anything like about their career, how they got there, any design related questions. You could literally ask like, can I get feedback on my portfolio? And I'm sure a lot of people would be down to do that. So please use this resource, as it's not just for Berkeley students, it's literally for any student out there, because it's free and it's good. So please use this. And also there's a resource called studentswho.design, which is a website that does online design school basically. I haven't used it personally because I never had the chance to, but they do this 3 week free product design course if you sign up for their newsletter or something like that. And from what they say on the website, a lot of the people who take this class or the resources go on to do a lot of big things like product designer, UI UX designer at these big companies. So if you're interested, you could definitely try for this resource. So yeah, let's just get into a quick review of event handlers. A couple weeks ago or 2 weeks ago when I introduced objects and the document object model, I talked about like how JavaScript, when it's being loaded and rendered on the page, it creates the DOM. That's how JavaScript, our code, reads this HTML file. And each object, of course, has its functions and properties, things like that, that we can access. And then we taught you .getElenentById. This is how we look through the DOM to get a certain object on the in our HTML from our code, so that we can make changes, dynamic changes to it, not just from HTML or CSS. We can now do it through code. And last week we taught you event handlers like onClick and onMouseOver. These event handlers that track whether an action has happened or not on your website. So we gave you this show greeting function that every time you click on a button element, it'll run the show greeting function. And we also showed you how to change CSS through JavaScript and not just the CSS files, through the .style, whatever CSS property there is. And I noted that all CSS properties that are being changed in JavaScript, the values that are taken in always has to be a string. Even if it's like 120 pixels, 120 in pixels always has to be in a string, or else it's not going to read properly. So again, we taught you how to modify CSS in JavaScript. And then we could apply that with event handlers and make a combination of that. Oh yeah, this is what I mentioned by like passing in strings as values for changes in CSS through JavaScript. And then we also taught you how to use anonymous functions. This is mainly when we have functions that have parameters, so we can't directly set the onClick to just the object without the parentheses. This is why we use anonymous functions. If you've done the homework already or like the lab, you probably are very familiar with this because you did make a lot of or kind of anonymous functions. You just made like functions that you can assign just without the parentheses, but they're kind of like anonymous functions, but not really. So today we're going to teach you something new, a new like structure in JavaScript, and it's called the array. You're going to hear me say array or list often, like interchangeably. There is a difference between that in CS, but I think in JavaScript, there's no difference. Like if you're a CS person, I'm sure it's like Python, or a list and array are interchangeable, but yeah. So basically in JavaScript, an array is a list of values. So we can now organize something like, what if I wanted multiple things in one variable? So now we could represent multiple objects in one placeholder. And what it looks like this in JavaScript. It's a little bit basic. Let's just walk through this step by step first. So the left side, this is self-explanatory. We taught you this like 3 weeks ago when we started JavaScript. This is how we declare a variable, let cart. So we now have a variable named cart. You guys should know this by now. But on the other side of the equal signs, we have a list syntax. So by declaring a list, we start by using square brackets. So we start with an opening square bracket and then put whatever inside and then close with square bracket, and that's our list. And then within each list, how we separate each item is with a comma. And that separates, so that says like, this is a different item from the next, things like that. And then within like our list, we can have multiple items. So in this example of cart list, we have a string protein as our first item in the array, and then a string caffeine as a second item, and then string bananas in our third item. And since banana is our last item in the list, we don't need to use a comma afterwards. Comma is only separating two things, but if it's the last thing in the list, then you don't need that. So pretty self-explanatory. Now we have a structure where we can hold 3 strings or 3 numbers, things like that, in one variable. And something cool about this is like there's a built-in .length. Is it a function or property? I feel like it's a property of lists. It's built into every single list that you create, where you can do, in this example, we have cart.length, and that would just return however many items or the length of the list itself. And in this case, we do console.log of this and a print 3, because we have the length of the list is 3, or we have 3 items in the list. And once we declare the list, you might wonder like, how do we individually access each item in that list? And this is something we call array indexing or list indexing. And basically most, if not all, programming languages have this. And how it works in CS is that most languages does something called zero indexed arrays, which means the first element or the first item of the array is at the 0 position, not 1. It's at 0. Don't ask me why it's like this. Programmers are just weird. That's literally how programming started, and no one just wanted to change it, I guess. So we start from hard bracket 0. And what I mean by hard bracket 0 is that if you take a look at the syntax on the right, we have our list, our cart, but this time we have like fruit strings, apples, oranges, bananas. How we get the first item is we do cart hard bracket 0. That would print out the first item, which is apple string, and then cart hard bracket 1, which is the second item, oranges, and then cart hard bracket 2, which is the third item, which prints out banana. And this is what I mean by zero index arrays, because we start the 0th position or the 0th index is the first item of the list, and then everything else is like -1. So if you imagine like we do cart of 3, like hard bracket 3, that would return an error because there is no 4th item in the list. That would say on the console, it would probably say like list index out of range or something, and then it would break your code. So be careful when you're indexing. So where are arrays useful? Why did I just learn how to put multiple things in one variable? So up until now, we've taught you getElementById, also query selector, which just returns one thing at a time. But like that's just unique to IDs, because mostly IDs are like unique to an HTML page. But we also have classes. Like classes, in the case of classes, we have classes that can have multiple items that have the same class name. So what if we get all the objects with the same class name? And how we could do that is by this document.getElementsByClassName. Keep in mind that the get elements is plural and not singular this time, because if you notice get element singular by ID, there's a big difference. A lot of students get this confused, and one time I spent 30 minutes debugging someone's code for their final project, and it turned out they forgot to make it plural for class name. So there's a huge difference between plural and singularity in these two like JavaScript functions. So again, we do document.getElements by class name, and then the similar structure of the string class name food item. So this would return us an array of elements that have the class food item. So here we have our shopping list that we've used for the past couple of weeks. If we did document.getElementById of food list, this would give us just this one thing, right? Because food list is the only thing that exists in this HTML. So it would just give us this unordered list tag object. But now if we do get elements by class name food item, we have three li tags that have the same name food item. So what would this look like when we run document.getElements by class name then? Basically, the food list or the food variable and that function would return us this list or this array of our three li tags, because all of these have the same food item class name. And that's the structure of what it looks like when it's returned. So a question for you guys, like, what do you think, what elements might use classes and what elements might use IDs on this Airbnb homepage? You can put it in the chat, unmute, whatever you want. Reminder that classes is for like things that might share the same style, and then IDs for something unique, probably. Box by Navi says the boxes for each location would be a class. Yeah, so like each card basically um, each house, you call it, I guess, or a location card would be a class because it has the same structure and the same styles. Like uh, this text here is bolded across all the locations, and the stars are all the same color, things like that. So you'd probably imagine that this whole card probably uses classes a lot. And shall you says nav bar might use ID, search bar could use ID. That is true because search bar is unique. Nav bar maybe also an ID, the whole thing, yeah, because nav bar is unique. You can imagine like each nav bar item is probably a class because they have the same styles to it. Logo could probably be an ID. But the whole point of me saying this is like to emphasize classes. Like if we did like dot class name of like location card or something, it's going to return like a list of all these locations, right? So now we can actually get a huge list of multiple elements with the same class name instead of just picking one based off of an ID or a query selector thing. So now this brings us to what we call loops or loopy loops, whatever you want to call it. There's many kinds of loops that are in CSS. There's while loops, there's do while loops, there's for each loops. But in this scope, we're going to be teaching you for loops, which is pretty simple, I want to say, because once you know this one, all the other loops are kind of, you'll learn it pretty fast. So there are also fruit loops, but personally, I think they're too sweet. I don't like fruit loops that much, but that's my personal opinion. So basically, a for loop allows you to repeat some code until a certain condition is met, or for a certain number of times. So what I mean by that is like, imagine wanting to do the same line of code over and over again for like 100 times. You probably don't want to write the same line of code for 100 different separate lines because that's just way too inefficient. With for loops, we can simplify that so that it could run 100 times and you only have to write it that one line once. So it basically, again, it does a certain thing, a thing for you a certain number of times without you having to write every single iteration out. And it's way cleaner, more maintainable code. And this is like the syntax that looks like it. We'll go through every step, but what this basically does is like it runs this console.log line 9 times. So we don't have to write this line 9 times. So let's just break it down step by step. So we initialize our for loop. We just start with for, and then within parentheses, we have this first part called start. Here we create a variable called I. It could be literally any name, but in CS, you'll see a lot of examples for a for loop start with like I variable because it stands for index. Like what I mentioned, array indexing, that's going to come in a bit. So let I equals 1. It could be any value, any starting number, whatever. But generally, you always use the number value for counting iterations. So this is what we start by. Like our index is going to start at 1 for this specific example. And we separate that by semicolon in between each like section of a for loop. So this next section is called the end of a for loop. This is how it knows when to stop. Because like if you don't specify this, your code is going to run forever and it's going to take up a lot of your computer, like RAM, memory, things like that. And then it's going to like overheat your computer. So you don't want a loop to run forever. So this is how we say like when to stop. And for in this case, we have a condition. Remember from last week, an if-else condition. This is just like similar to that, where as long as I is less than 10, we'll run the for loop. If this condition is false, we'll stop the loop and we'll quit out of it and go on, move to the next code. So this could be any condition as long as I is less than 100, 1,000, whatever condition you need. So that's the end part for a for loop. And again, we separate that by a semicolon and we move on to the next section of a for loop called the repeat section. So this is how we know how our variable I changes or whatever you named it. We say, in our case, we say I plus plus, which is the same thing as I plus equals 1 or I equals I plus 1. It's just adding 1 after running the for loop once. So what I mean by that is like we start it at 1, we run it once, we come back into the loop, And then when we come back into the loop, I is not 1 anymore. It becomes 2 because we did I plus plus. So every iteration of our loop, I changes and it's added by 1 based off of this example. It could be different. You do I plus equals 2. So it jumps 2 numbers every single time. It's up to you. But like this is also important because this tells you that there's changes going on in your for loop. Because if you don't mention this and I stays at 1, again, it's going to loop forever because I is always 1 and it's always less than 10. So again, your computer is going to break and it's going to run for the loop is going to run forever. So what's important to note that there's many ways to say I plus, you can add 1 to I or whatever variable you want. Again, it's like I plus equals 1, I equals I plus 1. Any of these work. So why use a for loop? Essentially, the left side of this code, the left side code runs the same as the right side. And here we have like 9 lines of code, which is, it's okay, you know, like I could do 9 lines, but if you think like 100 or 1,000, you want to run it something 1,000 times, you're not going to write the same line of code 1,000 times. Like that's crazy. So basically we do a for loop, and if we run through it, we start I at 1, and then we run console.log counting to 9. So we print counting to 9 and then plus I, which I is 1 now. So counting to 9, 1, which is similar to this, or it is this first line here. We print out counting to 9, 1. And then we restart the loop. And when we restart the loop, we add 1 to I now. So it becomes 2. And then I is 2 is still less than 10. So we can still run this loop. And then we run this line again, counting to 9 plus 2, which is the second line here. And then we come back into the loop, add 1 again to I, so it becomes 3. 3 is less than 10. We run the same line, counting to 9, 3. So that's this third line, so on and so forth until we reach 9. So once we run this, I is 9, and we run this line, we come back into the loop, we add 1. I is now 10. So we do this check on this condition. 10 is not less than 10. So this part becomes false. And at this point, we don't run the for loop, and we break out of the loop and then run everything underneath it. So that's why you don't see counting a 9 of 10, because 10 is not less than 10. So that's why we use a for loop, because within 3 lines, or just like 2 lines, if you don't count this curly bracket as a line of code, and within 2 lines of code, we did what we could do in 9 or 100 or 1,000, things like that. So much more efficient. So let's have this kind of code. Like what do you think this would print out? A question for you guys. If we run this kind of for loop. Erica says it will print out 0. And Susan would say 0 to 9. And then Erica says, wait again. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Cool. Yeah, Susan and Anna, you're correct. Basically, it prints out all the numbers from 0 to 9 because we start at I 0 and we increment I by 1 every single time we run the loop. And it'll get to 9, and 9 is less than 10. So we print 9 out, and once I becomes 10, we don't run it anymore because 10 is not less than 10, similar to what the example we showed. So another question, it's the same exact thing, but now we have a condition of I is less than or equal to 10. So what do you think this would print out? And yeah, same thing. Yeah, Dixie and Susan, good job. We print out very similar to what we did last time, but because it's less than or equal to, we also print out the 10. So 0 through 10. That's all the things we print out. So let's try a little bit more trickier question. I'm not going to walk through this yet until you have some time to think about this. But what do you think this would print out?
Howie, quick question. I'm confused about the I++ symbol.
Mm-hmm.
That adds 1, right?
Yeah, that just adds 1 every time.
So does the I++ always just add 1, or does it add whatever the previous term was? I'm a little confused on that.
It always adds one. That's so like I mentioned in this slide, I plus plus is the same as I plus equals one. Like we're only adding one every single time. It
Oh,
doesn't
okay, okay.
it
I
doesn't
missed
matter
that.
what the value of I was previously. It's just we're just incrementing by one every single time.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Yep. Cool. Yeah, back to this. What do you think this would print out? Yeah, exactly. We print out the three items of the list individually, of course. So let's just break this down step by step and walk through this example if we're kind of confused of how this works. We first initialize a list or an array, whatever you want to call it, of three strings: protein, caffeine, and bananas. Um, this is how we make the list or the array. But now in our loop, we set I equals, it starts at 0. That's kind of self-explanatory. It starts at 0. But we say I is less than cart.length. And with, remember I mentioned a couple of slides ago when I taught the dot length thing, it basically returns the number of items or the length of the list. So basically what this condition says is I is less than 3 because cart's length is 3 in this case. If we had 4 items in the list, it'd be I is less than 4. 5 items, BI is less than 5, similar like that. So this might have tripped you up a little bit, but all in all, it just says I is less than 3 in simplified terms. And then we also have the I++ incremental repeat section. And then we go into the console.log, and then we do the array indexing thing. So when it starts at 0, we do cart hard bracket 0. That'll print out the first thing of the list, protein. Come back into the loop, I becomes 1, and we do cart of 1. That's the second item on the list. We print out caffeine. And then come back into the loop, I is now 2. Cart of 2 is the third item of the list. We print out bananas, and then come back into the loop, I is 3, but 3 is not less than 3 anymore. So we quit the loop and finish. So like they mentioned in the chat, we print out the 3 items individually every iteration of the loop. So yeah, good job. So now we'll just scrap all that knowledge. That's just for the homework and stuff. If you're not like CS or anything, I highly doubt you'll probably use this on your website. Maybe you'll use get elements by class name. That's probably important. That might require you to use some for loops here and there, but beyond that, I don't think you'll need that in the scope of this class besides the homework. Oh yeah, speaking of the homework, I really like this homework because you get to dress Drake, the artist, the rapper. We call it the Dress Drizzy homework, and this is like basically all our favorite homework because you get to see him naked, kind of like half naked. You'll see his upper body, but you could put like different items of clothing on him, and you could strip him too. So definitely try it out. It's a pretty fun homework. So yeah. So now on to JavaScript libraries. If you gone to my check-ins for office hours, like project check-ins, I probably mentioned a lot about like JavaScript libraries and how I teach it in a couple weeks. So here's all about it. So what are JavaScript libraries in the first place? So JavaScript, like HTML, CSS, has a set of syntax rules that define logical executable environment, of course. So when we run it, it has to make sense to the computer or else you probably run into errors. However, we have libraries that are built on top of a language and act as tools that we can use right out of the box. So what that means is like developers out there have already coded up certain things that we can use within a couple lines of code without us having to redo the whole process. So if you think about it, like you're making pasta, you're probably going to buy pasta shells like that are already pre-made in the supermarket, right? Like, I don't think you guys really want to take the time to actually roll out the dough and make the shells yourself. Like that's really time consuming. If you have, props to you. I'm too lazy to do that. Always go to Safeway to get that pre-made stuff. But yeah, this is what I mean. Like this stuff is like a macaroni shell. Like that's already made for us. Why would we bother remaking it if they made it well already in the stores and we could just use it out of the box? So there are a lot of libraries out there. I'm going to go through like 10 or so and show you a demo of one of them, how to use it. But these are, again, like these are made for you so that within a couple of lines of code or like CSS, you can do all of what they show here. So first thing is particles.js. I'm going to just go to their website. So here we can see there's a lot of particles that are floating around. If we move our mouse, like these things are interactive, like, and when you could go to like their GitHub and actually see like their usage. So like, oh, load particles.js. And now we have like some HTML that we can kind of recognize already. We're just loading it in and then add some JavaScript to it. And then this stuff you probably don't need to worry about, but very simple to use. So you could probably replicate this within your website just with a few lines of code. There's also waypoints, which is like, I know a lot of you guys are doing like some interactive thing on your website where you scroll to a certain part of your website, something would change on the site, like your nav bar would change or some colors would change. And this is what waypoints does. It sets certain points on the website so that when you scroll past it or like scroll up to it, something will happen and a function will run. So this is probably a good thing to start looking at if you have that on your website. There's Quill, which is you can embed a text editor, like a word editor within your website, which is pretty cool in my opinion. There's Confetti, where you can literally recreate your Berkeley acceptance letter. If you remember, if you got into Berkeley, you saw that confetti raining down from the screen. You could replicate that with this JavaScript library. And I'm pretty sure you can also edit the confetti. So like I know someone did like snowflakes or something based with this library in previous semester, and it was pretty cool. There's Plier, which allows you to embed a really interactive and nice looking video player within your website. So if you want to show a video on your website, you could use this. And there's Snap SVG, which basically animates an SVG image. If you remember when I taught you in the images lecture, SVGs are the way to go because we can actually code them in HTML and now we can animate them. So yeah. There's 3.js, which allows you to make 3D objects on your screen. This is an example from CodeDrops, the Aviator website or game, I guess. They use 3.js to replicate 3D elements on the screen. There's matters.js, and this is like 2D physics. So things will like fall down like physics does. And if you're interested in like building a game like this is probably what you want to use. And then there's anime.js, which is a really, really powerful animation tool. And this allows you to take your animations to the next level because CSS animations and keyframes, they only can do so much. But if you want to do like really special animations, this is the tool that you use because it animates a lot more and they show a lot of examples on their website. There's jump.js, which might be applicable to a lot of your projects too, because a lot of you wanted to press a button and it go to a different part of the same page. This would do that because it'll allow you to jump to a certain part of this page with smooth scrolling too, which is pretty nice. And you could play around with their website for a demo. So yeah. And lastly, there's Type It, which is like a typewriter effect. You probably saw on a lot of people's showcase websites. They have like the typewriter effect where it just had an animation of typing out a word on your website. And this is what I'm going to show you and how to replicate that on a website real quick. So yeah, let's just go to their Type It website. Let me close these tabs. So this is what it's supposed to look like once we add it to our website. You can see that it's like a typewriter just adding letters to the sentence. I wouldn't worry too much about this code. This seems daunting, but don't worry about it. This is like basically what we don't need to worry about. And if we scroll, like we can see a lot of these demos. This is a simple string and it prints once. There's multiple strings if you want more than one line. You could do it also in a form element, things like that. And it also shows you all this HTML and JavaScript next to it so that you can copy and paste. These are copy and pasteable because they're open source and like they want you to use it. There's no plagiarization in this. And basically in the scope of our final project, using a JavaScript library counts as one feature. I think like using two libraries would also just count as one because JavaScript libraries overall is just one feature itself. So you could do rainbow text of different colors. So you notice how like, wow, they applied the .style.color.getRandomColor, whatever. So they used very similar JavaScript to what we just taught you. There's dynamic effects. So you could see how they actually like went back and changed the words and corrected the spelling errors. That's pretty cool with dynamic stuff. There's fire any arbitrary code whenever. Oh, so it like pause and go whenever you want, things like that. So I'm not going to go through all of it, but there's also more demos you can try out here. So let's just get into this part. It says easy setup and installation, and I trust them because let's just do step one real quick. Let me just show you the code. I just have an empty HTML file for now, and that's it. That's all I have. We'll just do what they want us to do when we load on page. It says load the script with a script tag. A CDN link is available. You don't need to worry about CDN. But for this, they give you a script tag. I'm just going to copy this. And that's basically how I import it. So now, boom, it's imported. Now I just have to like make a word type, you know. You don't need to worry about NPM. That's more towards like React and stuff, modules, things like that. But just look for script tags or any HTML things on their websites. So here it says configure and go. Choose an element to target, define what to type, pick other options, and kick it off. So let me just make a p tag real quick with ID text or name. And because I'll need to write JavaScript, I'm just going to make a new file. Let's call it typeIt.js. And I also have to link it a script tag. So source equals typeIt.js. So now we linked our JavaScript file to HTML. So here, I'm just going to copy this just for now because that's literally what you need. So strings, this is probably like what are the strings they want you to print out. You can just change this whatever. I'm just going to leave this here for now, but notice how they have this like selector here and this hashtag element. So I could probably assume that this has to do with an ID. So my ID of the thing I want something to change is called name. So I'm just do hashtag name because it's still an ID. But yeah, I just copied this, and now let's see if anything changed on my website. Wow. Here, let me zoom in. So notice how it's actually printing out a string. It's typewriting a string. I wrote how many lines of code? I wrote 5 lines of code. I didn't even write it. I just copied it, and I did this. Like you can imagine if I was making this library, it'd probably be hundreds or thousands of lines of code just to do this. But there's no need anymore because we have libraries, and we just imported it with 1 line of script, added like 1 line of HTML, added 5 lines of JavaScript, and now we have a working library. And there's also a lot of properties they have on their website. Let's see. We could like change speed to make it go slower, 25. Oh no, that goes faster. Okay, never mind. Like 125 then. Like this prints out extra slowly. Loop, we could set it to false. So this would probably print it out once and just stop there. What? Yeah, see it just stopped there. And you can see how this thing is still blinking, which is pretty cool. You could also change this string so that it just prints out the string that you want. You know, it's very customizable, things like that. Yeah, and then you could follow each example here of how like they did like different effects, like dynamic effects. You can see how they did like type this with a delay, move it back, the cursor back by like 3 index, delete 1 index, and then things like that. You could experiment with those. Yeah, there's other things that you could probably use. So here we see like if we have multiple lines, this is in a list format that we just taught you. So if we wanted wanted something to be printed out multiple times or multiple lines, we could just use the listing. And with this, let's see. And then it would print out a second line, which is pretty cool. So overall, libraries are pretty useful in this sense, and they're really easy to use. There's some that might be pretty complicated, but if you really want to use those, just let us know, and we'll try to figure it out with you if you have any questions. But yeah, I know, like, I think, what was it? Jump.js requires you to install npm. I didn't really find a script or any HTML you could import it with, so you might have to download it and put it in your project folder and use it from there. So that might require a little bit more work, but otherwise, there are some that are like this type it, where to use it, it's literally a URL, because that once you visit this URL, it will just download it every time the page loads. Otherwise, you could just download the actual files and just link it straight up, like it's a local file or something. Yeah, and then if you're interested in React, or you know React, this is probably the way to go instead of using the script tag. So yeah, are there any questions about this demo? It was pretty short, but pretty easy, I feel like.
What if you want to have spacing in between the two things in the list? If that makes sense. Like not so
Like,
that it's just on the next line, but maybe like 3, 4 lines down or something.
oh, that probably is a style thing, where you can add line height in CSS. Because I can also style this in CSS, right?
Oh,
Like,
right. Okay.
yeah, like, well, I don't have a CSS file right now, but I'll just do it inline, like font, family, Arial, something. So now it's like we could change up the styles of it without affecting the actual library itself, through CSS. So yeah, um, I just showed you this really fast because it's pretty simple to use, and once you add CSS, that's all up to you. But yeah, it's pretty customizable. Any other questions? Cool. So hopefully that helped a lot with like JavaScript. Basically, this is our last week of content. We have one more week after this class, which is not next week, but the week afterwards. Um, so all of the content is we're finished with. And the last week, we're thinking of doing like a panel for like for you guys to ask Q&A questions to learn about people's experiences in design and work in the industry in real life. So if you're interested in learning about that, definitely come out to it, because I don't think we're going to record it, just because we want to encourage attendance. And also, there's no actual content that's going to be tested, because that day is when the final project is due, and that's the last assignment of this class. So please come out to that lecture in, again, not the next week, but the week after that, December 1st. So uh, yeah, keep that in mind. And then we'll also have project presentations the Thursday right after on that same week. So yeah, excited for the last week of class. And again, you only have, if you finished homework 9 and lab, you literally have one more assignment, homework 10, and that's dressing Drake. So you can have a lot of fun with that, and then also work on final project during Thanksgiving break. So cool. Uh, if that's it, y'all are free to go. Thank you for tuning in. Again, reminder that Asia's lecture will be posted tomorrow because she's having Wi-Fi issues right now. But yeah, definitely check hers out, because it's very important if you want to pursue anything beyond this class in design. Cool. All right. Well, I'll see you guys on Thursday then. Bye.